At the moment, the government has imposed a series of £20 billion cut to benefits and a £9 billion cut to social care. Social care is now providing 25% less support to people than it was 5 years ago. It will be cut by 2015 by 33%. The structures that were set up undervaluing people are under huge pressure. What we're looking at still are huge systemic problems. I suppose what I would say, you might find this objectionable or pessimistic, but I would say that we've hardly moved since the 1970s. You know, we've moved money, we spend a lot more money even actually than we did in the 1970s, but in many respects we're still fundamentally in a very disempowered system that doesn't give people good rights. Who benefited from it? Actually, well, actually the previous government benefited because the biggest house price increase was between 96 and 2007, and we all thought we were so rich, and it was all nothing. It was 360% increase in house prices, while the economy hardly changed at all. You know? Now, so we're thinking we're wealthy, and we're not, and we borrow more because we now think we're wealthy, and what happens is the banks lend to us because they're encouraged to, people with disabilities. So some countries chose, like our country, to pour the biggest problems onto them, and some didn't. So in Europe generally we're seeing some things go backwards across the board, but we're also seeing people make very, very different decisions. And also again, although the problems in European countries where actually their problems are slightly different, I mean, they were all affected by the banking crisis, but some of the problems were not about... we are the most indebted country, isn't that something to be proud of? We have more debt than anybody else, but it's mostly private debt. That's our problem, is that home ownership debt. Whereas that's not the problem in Europe. The problem in Europe is primarily, particularly southern European countries, borrowing too much at a governmental level. And but their problems actually are dwarfed by our problem, if it's just looked at in terms of debt. So I think we're seeing different reactions, but we do seem to be particularly severe. We are already the third most unequal developed country in the world, and our rate of growth of inequality is now faster than the United States. So give us a few years and we will, that's another, we can win most indebted and most unequal. You know, wouldn't that be a great achievement? We also have the second most centralised welfare state in the world. So I think there are some things that are very British about this particular crisis. And that means I think we particularly owe ourselves that we must start thinking harder about what's really going on. I look back over 20 years of work in this area and I sometimes think I just got it badly wrong. One of the things I got badly wrong, I think, is constantly trying to fix the system and enable citizenship through fixing the system. Whereas actually citizenship, historically, is something that's seized by citizens, not given to them. Yes? So the other week, I was with Gary Gourlay launching People First England. I think we need to support activities that, I think what you're saying is true at a community level, but I also think there's a question of the voice of people with learning difficulties in our wider society. There are systemic pressures within the wider society that if we just sit there and wait for the government to do the right thing, we'll be sitting there forever. So I suppose I'm just making a further point that it's political as well. It's about personal responsibility, but part of that personal responsibility is also to address deep systemic injustices and to stop I think what I've spent a lot of time doing is trying to tinker with what government does to make it less stupid, or waiting for government to do things that are less stupid, or advising them to do things that are less stupid. Sometimes you have to fight for the what is less stupid. Sometimes you have to demand what is less stupid. So you have to do the stuff that you're describing in your communities, but you also there are political questions here about power and equality and rights, and we need to also be thinking about those. And so I don't think that, I'm not optimistic about the care bill. I think that things are very bad in our welfare system at the moment, and they're going, unless we change something, they're going to get a lot worse. And I think the way I would look at this issue is about the role of local government. What I've been trying to say to local government leaders and councillors and MPs is that the UK is incredibly centralised.
So I think almost the problem is the way in which we look at the law as the guiding framework in which we do things, because really, I mean, again, I'll take my favourite place, Barnsley. Barnsley have a population of 250,000 people, okay? Ancient Athens, at the peak of its power, producing the greatest art and culture we've ever known, had a population of just over 250,000. We behave as if 250,000 people is not enough to even run, you know, a small community. You know, it's hardly allowed any authority over anything. Whereas I think 250,000 people is enough for a country. And I would expect to see the dynamism and leadership and accountability of countries. So again, I think in terms of the we, I would like the we for Gloucestershire, or however you want to frame it up, to just feel much more empowered, not be really even worrying about what the government is doing in Westminster, but really challenging that and asking some very tough questions of themselves, but also of that system. I'm not optimistic. I think that the energy, again, and I'll upset the, I think the energy and the positiveness of valuing people and all of those things is well spent now. That, you know, we are, unless we find another way of lighting the flame and getting impassioned about what's really, really important and building new alliances and asking tough new questions, we're going to be in a very difficult place over the next few years. And we will just be overseeing a kind of dismantling of things we've taken for granted. Because the funding patterns and the assumptions that are written into the way Westminster is currently funding local government, huge impacts are still to have. And you know, places like Gloucestershire, you may not be suffering as much as places in the north of England, but it's all still going to come down the line at you. Nothing's changing at the fundamental level.
I do think there is a slight flaw in my own approach in sometimes always tweaking the system and not asking the political questions too. And I think that many of the critics of my own work from the disability movement would say it wasn't political enough. You know, if you don't create, it's fine to create a new system of personal budgets, but if you haven't created the kind of social and political movement that can really challenge and hold a system to account, it'll all fragment. Isn't that what really happened? Freedom of citizens is stuff citizens had to fight for. Whether it be in Rome, or ancient Athens, or all through human history, occasions arise where human beings say, this ain't good enough. We want to live as free citizens. We have real rights and we expect those to be respected. Yeah, and I feel that in one sense that is the challenge of the 21st century, to rediscover citizenship. About the second half of the 20th century, when you think about the political debates that happened, freedom has always been used only by neoliberals. And that seems to be really problematic. And in fact, one of the things that you could say about the whole personalisation debate, again, this is all being very kind of a bit grand about it, but for many people in the disability movement that I know, they were really uncomfortable with the fact that the logic of their own position was to demand freedom. Yeah? Because if that's what you look at independent living, that's what it really does require. Now, for me, as a Democratic Republican, I see no difficulty in reconciling social and economic rights and freedoms. Yeah? But we haven't really got, either on left or right, anybody articulating that. So that's part of a big political challenge for us. We've really only got, historically, with people saying, what we need is more state spending to do good things, nice things to people and give them as gifts. Yeah? And that's basically been the left's position, however it dresses it up. Yeah? Or, oh no, we need to leave it to the market. I mean, if again, this is getting probably, I will stop wittering on about this stuff and we're going to get down to some basic stuff. But at one level, if we're going to be, to put it in historical terms, we have a competition between two kinds of oligarchs, two kinds of elites. People who say, leave all the power with us in London, we all went to Oxford and Cambridge and now run the Labour Party, and we're going to take care of you. Or another elite, we all went to Oxford and Cambridge, and we're going to give all the money and power to the markets, and they'll take care of you. And that's basically the choice in Britain today. Yeah? So that's called oligarchy. You know, when you give power to a small group of people who then do things in their own interests. Its use is that we know how to do good stuff, and we have done for decades. So at one level, all we really need to do is to wake up to the power we already have. In a way, what's happened is that some of these things have run their own course. They can't get any balmier. They've almost run out of degrees to which they can centralise things. Yeah? So they've got maybe another decade or so, but they're really going to struggle to centralise power any further, and then the thing will just fragment. I'd rather we didn't have to go through another painful 10 years of stupidity. But it's us that will figure out, us, people like you, people with disabilities, ordinary citizens, who will figure out these solutions, and they are emerging all over the country. And when we start to get a better sense of what that looks like, then I think we can change some quite big things. And without revolution or blood, but just with a bit of common sense and Britishness. It'll be messy, but it doesn't need to be painful. Think about this as written. Seems like a very political thing, but it's really interesting, I think. I used to think that freedom was freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of conscience, but freedom needs to include all of the lives of all of the people. Freedom is the right to sow what you want, it's the right to make boots or shoes, it's the right to bake bread from the grain you sow and to sell it, not to sell as you choose. The same goes for a locksmith, a steelworker or an artist. Freedom is the right to live and work as you wish and not as you're ordered to. But these days there's no freedom for anyone when you write books, when you sow grain, when you make boots. What I like about the quote is it relates a little bit to what you were saying before, but it's reminding us that the notion of freedom is not just grand politics, or it's not freedom of speech and these things, which are very important, but it actually goes to the very bread and butter issues of how we live our lives and what we choose to do. And this is going to seem a very controversial thing to say, but I think freedom's pretty scarce these days, at that level. I think a lot of people feel that they aren't free to do what they want to do, even though they've got a lot of wealth, and they're in a job, they seem to have a lot of material things. But if asked if they were free, we'd have to say, well, I'm not really free, because I have to carry on doing that job to pay the mortgage, or maybe the school fees to pay, or there's a whole series of things that people put on their backs that makes them feel really not free at all. I think I'm going to write a little article shortly called "We're All in the Workhouse Now," because the way in which society is structured and the way government is set up is and it goes back to those some of those political factors, is that there is a desire to order us and organise us, so we don't have the big institutional walls, but we're all behaving a little bit as if we're all part of the system, and the system should be in control of us and should order us. So this notion of freedom seems to me really, really important.